Okay, so you've shared some really fascinating and honestly quite bizarre material with us, all centered around this book, Hunt for the Skinwalker.
That's the one. Science confronts the unexplained at a remote ranch in Utah. Published back in 2005.
Right, and it really throws you into some uh, deeply strange stuff happening in this very isolated spot.
It absolutely does. And it's got this compelling mix of authors, too.
Yeah.
You've got Colm Kelleher, who's a biochemist, and he was actually the lead for the field research for NIDS. That's the National Institute for Discovery Science.
NIDS, okay, I've heard of them.
And then there's George Knapp, the investigative journalist. Apparently, he was the only reporter who got inside access to what NIDS was doing there.
Wow, okay, so a scientist and a journalist, that's quite a team.
Exactly. That combination, the scientific perspective right alongside the journalistic digging, it makes you sit up and pay attention from the start.
Definitely. So for this deep dive, our mission really is to dig into what makes this book tick. What's the core claim here?
Well, the big unsettling idea is that the things reported at Skinwalker Ranch aren't just stories or mistakes.
No.
The book argues they represent something genuinely anomalous, something science, as we know it, struggles to explain.
So not your typical ghost story. This is positioned as something more fundamental.
That's the thrust, yeah. The authors are essentially saying this place pushes the boundaries of what science currently understands about reality. They're suggesting the sheer amount and, frankly, the weirdness of the phenomena reported there. It demands a different look, maybe a less conventional scientific approach.
A place where the rules seem to bend a little, or a lot.
Or break entirely, according to the book. Yeah.
And the location itself is part of the story, isn't it? This ranch in Utah.
Oh, absolutely. It's a 512-acre property southeast of Ballard, Utah, really out there in the Uinta Basin.
And it borders the Uinta and Ouray Indian Reservation. That seems significant somehow.
It does. And plus, that whole Uinta Basin area, it's got this reputation.
Yeah, UFO Alley, right.
Yeah.
I read that somewhere.
Exactly. So there's this backdrop, this regional history of strange sightings even before you get to the ranch itself.
Interesting. So the book kind of sets that stage, suggesting the ranch might be a hot spot within a larger zone of weirdness?
Precisely. It implies we're not just looking at one isolated family's weird experiences, but maybe a concentration point for something broader.
Okay, got the setting. So let's get into the story.
Yeah.
How did this ranch become ground zero for all this strangeness? It starts with the Sherman family, I believe.
Yes, though the book sometimes calls them the Gormans, likely a pseudonym to protect them.
Right.
They bought the place in 1994, just wanted a quiet rural life, raise some cattle.
Classic dream. But it didn't turn out that way.
Not even close. The book says almost immediately, like right after they moved in, they started facing these baffling, disturbing events.
So it wasn't a slow burn, it was immediate.
Pretty much immediate. The term high strangeness really applies here. Events that just defy easy explanation started happening almost right away.
And that first chapter, the wolf encounter, that's pretty memorable.
Oh, yeah. It grabs you. They describe this massive wolf, way bigger than normal.
Huge, right?
And they shoot it multiple times, close range, with powerful rifles.
Right.
And the thing barely reacts, just calmly walks off. And then the really weird part, its tracks just vanish. Gone.
Okay, that's not normal wildlife behavior. Not at all.
Right. It immediately establishes this pattern of encounters that seem, well, outside the normal rules of physics and biology. This wasn't just a big wolf. It was an event that shook their reality.
And that was just the beginning, you said? What came next? The cattle mutilations?
Yes, that's another major, deeply disturbing element. Recurring incidents.
And these weren't just coyotes or predators.
Definitely not, according to the descriptions. We're talking surgical-like wounds.
Yeah.
Very precise.
Like what?
Specific organs removed: eyes, tongues, reproductive organs, and the carcasses. Completely drained of blood.
No blood.
Virtually none found at the scene, and often zero tracks around the body, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing.
That implies, well, it implies something incredibly weird. Advanced technology or
something else entirely, something operating outside known animal behavior or even human capabilities, at least conventional ones.
And the impact on the family must have been immense.
Devastating financially, losing cattle like that, but also emotionally. The sheer strangeness, the precision, the lack of explanation, it suggested an intelligence behind it. That's terrifying.
And on top of that, they were seeing things in the sky, UFOs.
Yes, frequent reports, UFOs, orbs of light, things moving incredibly fast, doing maneuvers that conventional aircraft just can't do.
So not just distant lights, but objects with extraordinary capabilities.
Right. The book details different types, sometimes large silent triangles, other times these fast zipping orbs, and these sightings happen alongside all the weirdness on the ground.
It just kept piling up.
Yeah.
Was there activity inside the house too?
Apparently, yes. Poltergeist type stuff, objects moving on their own, things appearing and disappearing.
So nowhere felt safe.
That's the impression, that feeling of being watched, messed with, even inside their own home, like they were under siege.
Under siege. Wow. And there were other creatures mentioned besides the wolf.
Yeah, the book mentions others. A sinister hyena-like creature is one description.
Hyena-like in Utah.
Oh, exactly. And also reports of large, hairy, humanoid figures, sort of Bigfoot-like, maybe.
Okay, so cryptids possibly entering the mix too.
It seems like it. These encounters with various strange creatures just add another layer of biological mystery. And then there were ground markings, like crop circles, and even disembodied voices.
Man, it sounds relentless. Just a constant stream of the inexplicable.
That's the picture the book paints, the sheer variety, all hitting this one family in this one place.
It makes sense why they'd eventually want out.
Absolutely. The book quotes them feeling like they were under siege by an unknown enemy or enemies.
And that's when Robert Bigelow stepped in, the aerospace guy.
That's right. George Knapp's journalism about the Shermans' experiences got Bigelow's attention, and he bought the ranch in 1996, specifically to study it.
Okay, so the Sherman era sets this intense stage. But the book suggests the weirdness didn't stop when they left right. NIDS took over, but the phenomena continued.
Exactly. The book broadens the scope beyond just the Shermans. It suggests this is a location with a long history, and the NIDS team themselves became witnesses.
So let's talk about that wider spectrum. The UFO sightings, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
They kept happening.
Apparently so. More reports of structured craft, those silent triangles again, and those fast orbs.
And interacting with the environment, too.
Yes, accounts of lights interacting with a nearby reservoir, Bottle Hollow. So not just flying overhead, but engaging with the landscape.
And the strange creatures. Did NIDS personnel see them, too?
According to the book, yes. More encounters with those large, hairy humanoid figures. And significantly, Colm Kelleher himself, the lead NIDS scientist on site, he reportedly had his own sighting of one of these things.
A scientist seeing a Bigfoot-like creature. That's notable.
It certainly adds weight, doesn't it? The book also mentions just otherworldly creatures, keeping it a bit vague, but hinting at things beyond known biology. And you have the backdrop of Sasquatch reports in the wider Uinta Basin region.
So maybe unknown animals, maybe something else. And the mutilations. Did they continue under NIDs?
The book indicates they did. Still with that disturbing surgical precision, lack of blood, no tracks.
Even happening in daylight sometimes.
That's one of the particularly unsettling claims, yeah. Happening in broad daylight, yet still with no evidence of how or who. It implies incredible stealth or capability.
Okay, and those orbs. They seem like a major recurring theme. What more does the book say about them?
They're described in more detail. Varying sizes, different colors, moving in ways that suggest intelligence, not just random lights.
Interacting with things.
Yes, interacting with animals. There's that phrase, dog zapping orbs.
Dog zapping. That sounds ominous.
It does. And the book even hints quite darkly at these orbs being linked to lethal consequences sometimes. It raises serious questions about their nature. Benign lights they were not, apparently.
That's chilling. And the poltergeist activity inside the ranch house? That continued after the Shermans, too.
The book suggests it did. Objects moving, strange occurrences inside the buildings, reinforcing the idea that the strangeness was tied to the place, not just the people.
Then there's this idea of invisible forces, like energy fields.
Yeah, kind of abstract, with reported physical effects.
Such as?
Accounts of cattle suddenly stampeding in panic for no visible reason, as if reacting to something unseen, and also the possibility that these forces interfered with electronic equipment, cameras malfunctioning, radios acting up.
Adding a tech interference angle. And what about apparitions? More ghostly stuff.
Beyond just poltergeist activity, yeah. Reports of actual figures, like shadowy entities seen peering into windows.
No, that's creepy. Like being watched.
Exactly, a pervasive sense of observation by something unseen. And all of this, of course, happens under the shadow of the local lore, the Skinwalker.
Right, the Navajo legend. Does the book lean into that?
It acknowledges it strongly. The idea of a shape-shifting entity drawing from that tradition becomes a kind of lens or potential framework for understanding some of the shapeless, elusive phenomena.
Wow. Okay, putting it all together, UFOs, cryptids, mutilations, orbs, poltergeists, invisible forces, apparitions, local legends. It's an astonishing collection of the bizarre for one location.
It really is. You can see why Bigelow thought it was worth a serious, funded investigation.
Let's get into that NIBS investigation then. Bigelow buys the ranch in '96, founds the National Institute for Discovery Science. Their goal wasn't just ghost hunting, right? They had scientific aims.
Absolutely. NIDS was founded in '95 with a specific, ambitious mission to apply, quote, a standard scientific approach to anomalies.
Okay.
Buying Skinwalker Ranch was about creating a dedicated field site, a real-world lab, basically, to gather hard data on all this stuff the Shermans reported.
So how did they go about it? What was their method?
Well, it was multi-pronged. First, they put together an interdisciplinary team.
Scientists from different fields?
Exactly. Physicists, biologists, engineers, even psychologists, trying to cover different angles. Kelleher, the biochemist, was the boots-on-the-ground lead. And Knapp, the journalist, was documenting.
And they watched the place constantly.
Round-the-clock surveillance was key. Cameras, observation posts, trying to catch things as they happened.
Did they use scientific instruments? What were they trying to measure?
Yes, definitely. The book details their use of passive environmental sensors, things like electromagnetic field detectors.
Try to pick up unusual energy readings.
Right, or variations in the magnetic field looking for anomalies. Also, radiation detectors, Geiger counters, and the like, trying to see if any of these events left measurable traces in the environment.
This was the NIDS era focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Later owners used different tech.
Correct. The book focuses on NIDS's initial approach with these environmental monitors. Later efforts, not covered in this book, brought in things like ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, more advanced stuff, but NIDS started with these fundamentals.
And besides the tech, they gathered other kinds of data. Witness accounts.
Oh, absolutely crucial. They meticulously documented eyewitness reports. Not just the Shermans in detail, but also everything their own NIDS personnel saw.
Including Keller's sighting we mentioned.
Exactly. And they talked to neighbors, too, gathering wider context. They also tried to collect physical evidence whenever possible.
Like what? Soil samples. Tracks.
Yeah, analyzing unusual tracks, any strange ground markings, taking soil and vegetation samples, trying to find anything tangible.
What about the mutilations? Did they get vets involved early on?
The book notes that was a bit of a gap, actually. There wasn't much early, detailed veterinary analysis of the carcasses, which might have offered more conventional explanations or ruled them out more definitively.
Okay. And the NIDS team was actually living there, right?
Yeah.
On site.
A huge part of it was their extended presence, spending hundreds of days and nights on the property, hoping that direct, sustained observation would yield results.
It sounds like a serious, well-funded effort. But the book makes it clear they faced major challenges. What made it so hard?
Well, the phenomena themselves were the biggest hurdle. They were described as totally sporadic, unpredictable.
Hard to study something if you don't know when or where it'll show up.
Exactly, and often very fleeting, over before they could get instruments locked on or get a clear look. This made systematic data collection almost impossible.
And getting repeatable evidence. The cornerstone of science.
That was the core problem. They couldn't make the phenomena happen on demand, couldn't reproduce the events in a controlled way. Plus, they didn't even have a solid theory for what they were dealing with, what kind of physics or biology could explain it.
And didn't the book mention the phenomena seemed reactive?
Elusive.
Yes, that's another key challenge highlighted. Some accounts suggest the phenomena seemed almost aware of being watched.
Like it would stop if they pointed a camera at it. Stuff like that. Or activity would die down when a big investigation team was present, only to flare up again later. This idea that it might be intelligently avoiding detection.
That makes rigorous science incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
It really does. It introduces this element that seems almost playful or deliberately obstructive.
So there's this tension, isn't there? They called it a scientific investigation, but a lot of the methods sound more like, well, paranormal investigation, surveillance, eyewitness accounts.
That's a really sharp observation. The book definitely frames NIDS as scientific, highlighting the scientists and the goal of rigor.
But the evidence they gathered.
Right. In practice, they relied heavily on observation, anecdotes, passive monitoring, the things you do when you can't control the variables.
And the lack of peer-reviewed publications kind of underlines that, doesn't it?
It does. Critics point exactly to that gap between the scientific aspiration and the kind of evidence they actually managed to collect. It's a story of science hitting a wall, maybe? Or needing new methods for truly bizarre stuff.
Okay, so NIDs didn't walk away with slam dunk proof. But the team members, Kelleher included, saw things themselves.
Yeah, the book emphasizes that. These weren't just secondhand stories by the time NIDS was involved. Trained observers, scientists, engineers. They reported personally witnessing inexplicable, often unsettling things.
Which lends credibility, even without hard data.
It underscores the persistence and the strangeness, definitely. It wasn't just the Shermans. The place itself seemed consistently weird, even to scientific personnel.
But again, witnessing isn't the same as measuring and proving in a scientific sense. What was the main takeaway, scientifically speaking, or the main lack of takeaway?
The crucial point, really, was that failure to secure conclusive, repeatable physical evidence that would satisfy mainstream science. That's the bottom line. Lots of weird events, yes. Hard proof, no.
Did they form any general impressions, though? Any working theories, even if unproven?
The sense they often got, according to the book, was that they were dealing with something elusive, maybe intelligent.
The reactivity thing again.
Yeah, and something that seemed to operate outside known physics. Defying gravity, instant acceleration, things like that. This idea of an elusive, perhaps conscious phenomenon kept coming up.
So where does the book leave the reader? No neat scientific answers.
No definitive conclusions, no. Instead, the authors argue that the sheer weight of evidence, the eyewitness accounts, the NIDS observations, points to a genuine complex anomaly.
Something that challenges current science.
Exactly. They present it as a case study showing that maybe our current scientific models just don't cover everything, that reality might be stranger than we think.
And the implications are pretty huge if they're right.
Oh, yeah. The book calls them utterly hair-raising. It hints at, other dimensions, hidden aspects of reality, basically that the world might be far more mysterious than conventional science admits. It's a call to maybe broaden our scientific horizons.
Since the science wasn't conclusive, the book moves into more speculative ideas, right?
Yeah.
What kind of theories do they float?
Yes, it shifts gears into exploring possibilities. The interdimensional hypothesis is a big one. The idea that the ranch is a fin spot, a gateway between realities.
Makes sense given the variety of phenomena.
Then there's the classic extraterrestrial or UFO hypothesis, linking it to non-human intelligence from elsewhere.
Okay.
They also delve into folklore and the paranormal, the Skinwalker legend itself, other cryptids like Bigfoot potentially, ancient curses, maybe connections to what some call shamanic realities.
A wide net there.
Very wide. And they also consider more grounded, though still unexplained, ideas like maybe unknown natural phenomena, localized energy fields.
Or even secret human tech, military stuff.
That's mentioned too, the possibility of advanced terrestrial technology being tested, maybe mimicking paranormal events. And finally, there's that recurring trickster idea, that the phenomenon itself is deliberately elusive, maybe even deceptive.
So it really covers the gamut of explanations, from the mundane but secret to the truly extraordinary.
It does. And it reflects that journey from seeking hard proof to trying to grapple, interpretively, with something that defied easy answers. The speculation acknowledges the limits of what they could scientifically prove.
Given all that strangeness and the lack of firm answers, how was the book received? Must have been polarizing.
Definitely mixed. Lots of praise for the narrative itself. People found it gripping, scary, a real page-turner, especially those already interested in UFOs or the paranormal. User reviews online are often quite positive.
But the science part, that drew criticism.
Yes, that was the main sticking point for critics. Many felt it didn't live up to the "Science Confronts the Unexplained" subtitle. They pointed to the reliance on anecdotes, the lack of hard data, maybe not enough critical questioning of the accounts.
And the inconclusive ending probably didn't help with that crowd.
Right. Some felt unsatisfied. And the deep dive into speculation at the end felt like too much of a leap for some reviewers. There were also some concerns raised about how respectfully the Native American Skinwalker beliefs were handled.
Important context. But despite those criticisms, the book had a huge cultural impact, didn't it? Skinwalker Ranch is practically a household name now in certain circles.
Oh, undeniably. It catapulted the ranch from a local Utah legend into the global paranormal spotlight.
How so? What came out of it?
Well, it directly inspired the 2018 documentary, also called Hunt for the Skinwalker. And then, of course, the big one, the History Channel show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch.
Which is hugely popular.
Massively. It brought the story to a whole new audience. There's even been a graphic novel adaptation, plus countless articles, podcasts, online discussions. It just exploded.
And the term Skinwalker itself.
Yeah, that term entered the mainstream lexicon, sometimes used pretty loosely, detached from its original cultural roots, which is something to be mindful of.
Right. But within ufology and paranormal research, the book itself is seen as important.
Very much so. It's often cited as a landmark case, one of the most detailed, scientifically attempted investigations of a paranormal hotspot up to that time. Even with the debate about its success, the documentation itself is significant in those fields.
And maybe the most startling impact, its connection to the U.S. government getting interested in UAPs.
That's the kicker, isn't it? It's a documented link.
How did it happen?
The book tells how a DIA official, James Lakatsky, read it, got intrigued, and actually visited the ranch.
A Defense Intelligence Agency guy.
Yep, he reportedly had his own weird experience there, and he then told Senator Harry Reid about it.
Wow.
And that conversation, sparked by Lakatsky reading this book, was a key factor in Reid pushing for funding for those secret Pentagon programs, AAWSB and ATIP, the ones set up to study UFOs or UAPs.
That is incredible. A book about weird happenings on a ranch directly influencing high-level government interest in UAPs.
It's a stunning example of, well, the power of narrative, maybe.
It really seems that way. Despite the lack of definitive scientific proof, the story in Hunt for the Skinwalker was so compelling.
Compelling enough to be a bestseller, to fuel documentaries and TV shows, and yes, to actually catch the ear of people in power and influence government programs. The story had more impact than the verifiable results in many ways.
It speaks volumes about our fascination with the unknown, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The book's legacy shows how deeply we're drawn to mysteries that push the boundaries of our understanding, even when answers remain elusive.
So wrapping up this deep dive, Hunt for the Skinwalker is clearly more complex than just a collection of spooky tales.
Definitely. It's about the limits of science, facing the truly strange. It's a cultural phenomenon, and it's got this surprising link to real-world government UAP investigations.
And it really hammers home the elusiveness of whatever is or was happening there. The core mystery remains.
Stubbornly unresolved, yeah. Despite all the attention and investigation described in the book, it leaves you with more questions than answers, which is part of its enduring appeal, I think.
That cultural footprint.
Yeah.
And the government connection. It just shows how powerful these stories of the unexplained can be.
It really does. Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe.
Yeah.
Consider how a compelling story, even without ironclad proof, can genuinely shape perception and even drive real-world action. What does the enduring puzzle of Skinwalker Ranch suggest about where our current science hits its limits, and maybe about the fundamental nature of belief when confronting the unknown?
Something to definitely chew on.
Yeah.
A fascinating look into a very strange place.